wanted to have a medical doctor on this series for Meat for Mental Health series because some people are still afraid to eat meat. Maybe they've gotten some bad advice from some ill-informed practitioner or just some bad information. And I thought it might be helpful if we had Dr. Anthony Chaffee, who is an American medical doctor. He lives in Australia and practices in Australia now, but he's an American Western trained medical doc with a neurosurgical residency. And he's been studying optimal human nutrition for over 20 years. He took it upon himself to learn everything that he could about optimal human nutrition. So I am really thrilled to have him on the show. So if you are still concerned about meat and eating meat for your health, particularly your mental health, we get all into that. So hopefully at the end of this, you will feel much more comfortable with meat for mental health. But Dr. Chaffee, welcome to the Nursel podcast. I'm very excited to have you on the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about meat. Obviously, we're going to talk about meat and how meat is healing to the body. And really, I'm hoping that people that are afraid of meat after hearing you will not be afraid anymore. But before we do that, tell me a little bit about you. Like, where did you grow up? I'm wondering, like, okay, you're in Australia, but you're American. Did you want to be a doctor for a long time? That sort of stuff.
Yeah, sure. So yes, I am American. I grew up in Southern California, and then my family moved up to the Seattle area when I was about nine or 10, just almost 10. And so we lived up there for a while. My family's still in that area. I went to college in the area. Then I went to England, was playing rugby over there, decided to stay abroad for a medical school, went to the Royal College of Surgeons, continued playing rugby and traveling, and really enjoyed that. Then I was doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh, helping out with family issues. I actually had to leave my residency for a family emergency. And then I was doing all the work in Bangladesh. And that was with the Rohingya refugees that were escaping genocide in Burma. For those who don't know, there was like an actual genocide in 2017 in Burma where the government unofficially killed about 200,000 people in about a month. And 1 million people fled into southern Bangladesh to sort of escape that. And so they were in desperate need of help. And so I wanted to go and help. And so I was there for a while. Yeah. And then when I came back, I decided, I was sort of thinking about where do I want to go to, rejoin a residency and get going back again with neurosurgery. And so I decided to come to Australia because I had some friends down here who really had a lot of good things to say about it. And I was very interested from a rugby standpoint, always been interested in checking out Australia. So I decided to come down. I have always been interested in medicine ever since I was a kid. I remember that being one of my earlier coherent thoughts was that, I did want to be a doctor and I wanted to know exactly how the body worked and how, down to like, cells and molecules. It's just, I want to know exactly how the body works and how to fix it and make it better. And so tall task, but was the thought as a kid. Yeah. And yeah, so, then when I was growing up, my favorite subjects were math and sciences and biology and chemistry and all these sorts of things. So it just sort of fed into that. It's like, well, I actually really like this stuff. And so I might as well just keep going with it. I'm very glad I did. I do wish I kept going with math though. I really love that subject. I wish I would have done sort of like a dual major, biological sciences and chemistry as well as mathematics, because I really like that, but it didn't happen. But I really love medicine. I love being able to help people and I love being able to do surgery. And actually, I think it's sort of amazing being able to go in and physically fix someone with your hands. I think that's probably just the most incredible thing that someone can do for a person. So I really, really enjoy that.
Yeah, that is incredible. I mean, to be able to go in and help somebody with your hands, I think that really is not much better than that. So I knew about the rugby. I'm headed to England actually in a few hours. So yeah, we're really excited.
Great.
Yeah, nice. But I guess I didn't realize that you had been in England, but that makes sense because I knew about the rugby. Yeah, big rugby player.
So are you still doing surgery and seeing patients and all of that there?
So I rejoined, got back into neurosurgery here. So I'm doing that for the last sort of 3 years, 3.5 years, taking a couple months off this year just because I was just sort of very overloaded
Yeah.
with everything. On top of neurosurgery, I was also working on the weekends that I had available. I was working in a private clinic in, well, basically preventative health, preventive medicine, metabolic health, functional medicine, sometimes it's called as well. Just seeing people that don't feel well, don't feel good, and have something going on, but they're not like just a hard and fast case that you can look at the blood test and go, yep, that's completely wrong. That's the thing too, is that some doctors will look at the spectrum and only look at the two ends and
Right.
say, okay, well, you either have too much cortisol and you have Cushing's disease, or you don't have any and you have Addison's, and there's just not everything in the middle is normal. And of course it's not. And
Right.
so people can feel pretty rotten without having, just a blowout case of whatever it is. And so we address that and see what's going on with people and try to help them. And we have a lot of dietary and diet and lifestyle interventions as well that help them. And bariatric medicines are helping people lose weight as well. So that's obviously very important to address diet and that. And what's really nice that I can incorporate a carnivore diet and that sort of thing, my knowledge and experience from that to help people in that regard as well. So that's been really nice. And so basically 7 days a week I'm working. I'm at either the hospital or a clinic, and then after that I'm doing interviews like this, or I'm working on my own podcast and doing a lot of the online requirements that I need to do. So it was very, very full on, and so, sort of something I had to give. So,
Yeah.
and I wanted to write a book at the same time. So there's a lot of things that were going on. And so I sort of took a bit of a break in the hospital, but I'm still doing, some surgeries and things like that as well. I'm doing that 3 days a week, and then my private clinic once a week. So it's sort of 4 days a week at the moment, and then all my online stuff after that.
I know you're so busy and so popular right now because everybody is in the carnivore world. You're very popular. Everyone loves to talk to you because you're very knowledgeable and you have an interesting way of getting to the carnivore diet, because I don't think many doctors are introduced to the idea of plants being a bit of a problem for people. So
Yeah.
but I also am really interested in how much do you get with people. So I see people that are mostly with mental health and digestive stuff. That just seems to be my background's in clinical mental health, right? And so when we pull people off of the plants, things seem to improve dramatically for people. So I just wondered, for you in your practice, how carnivore are you going with people? Do you give people options there? I mean, obviously you have to give them options because not everybody's wanting to go carnivore, but how does that look in your practice?
Well, I do think that a carnivore diet is optimal. I think that's the gold standard. That's the best that we can strive for, because I do think it's our biologically appropriate and most optimal diet. I think that's just biologically what we do best on. And not everyone's there. So not everyone necessarily wants to do that, but more and more people are. And when you explain to them, in those sorts of terms, they sort of, oh, okay, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And, I think that there are obviously things that if they're like, okay, well, I can't just do just meat and water. Well, then, getting rid of certain things, obviously cutting out processed foods and getting rid of sugar and carbs. I think those are the mainstay, especially for mental health. You really do need to do that. There's the work from, Dr. Chris Palmer and Georgia Ede and Rachel Brown in England, or in Scotland. All these people are doing amazing work and showing that ketogenic diets can reverse major psychiatric illnesses such as schizophrenia, which is shocking that you can do this. But this has to do with, what the thought is this has to do with our mitochondrial health and our metabolic health, and that when you fix your metabolism, you're also fixing the metabolism, the mitochondria of your neurons, and they're working better, and then your brain works better, and then you don't have these mental health disorders and a lot of other issues as well. And so it depends on what someone's going for. If they have some issue like that, I say, look, you really do need to just be off carbs. That's just, you have to do that. And if someone has something, more stubborn, then it's like, okay, well, we really need to sort of reduce a lot of other things as well. So for mental health, I've seen people significantly improve with the ketogenic diet, but I've seen other people that still aren't quite there yet. And for some reason, for whatever property that is in it, we have leafy greens and different sorts of things, for some reason can trigger depression, anxiety, and other sorts of mental health issues. And I find that that's for these people, just eliminating down to just meat and water, especially red meat and water, they do much better. They do much better than even a ketogenic diet does for them. So I think that that's very important people to know about. And then especially with issues like autoimmune diseases, they really do need to be just on meat and water, and really just red meat and water, because they're going to be very sensitive to any sort of inflammation that's going to go on in their body, and these different defense chemicals and different sorts of things that you can eat, different lectins and so on. You have leaky gut that get into your bloodstream, your body reacts to them, you make antibodies towards them, and those cross react with your own body. And you just have to get rid of these things. You really do have to just get down to just meat and water. And it does appear as well that even chicken and pork, and especially farmed fish and especially dairy, that these can absolutely trigger autoimmune issues. It's probably mostly to do with what the animal's eating, except for dairy. Dairy is just a bit pro-inflammatory anyway because of the casein. But the animals, like pork and chicken and things like that, these monogastrics aren't great at breaking down toxins in plants that they're not evolved to eat. And so we're feeding a bunch of we're feeding chicken and pigs corn and soy. They're not designed to eat these things.
Right.
And so they're not able to completely detoxify them, and something's getting through, it seems. But the ruminant animals, the red meat animals, seem to be better at this. So if they're just eating grass, that's the best. And some people with autoimmune issues, very stubborn autoimmune issues, they really just need to be on grass finished beef or lamb. And that's for that reason. But a lot of people would do just fine on even just Safeway beef. So it depends on who I'm talking to, what their issue is. And I have some patients that are culturally, religiously vegetarian, and they're like, look, I can't do it. And so we're like, okay, fine. So we'll meet them where they are, still try to do something ketogenic, still try to cut out some of the worst offending plants, such as nightshades and certainly sugar and processed foods, and then see where they're at. Okay, can you eat eggs? You can eat eggs. Great. Eat a lot of eggs and try to limit these other things out.
Yeah. And I will often have people say, well, I'm eating the egg whites. And I'm like, yo, we want the yolk.
Yeah.
Like the yolk is where we get the nutrients. Yeah, and I studied with Georgia Eid. So I absolutely adore Georgia. And Rachel's been on the show. Lovely. Love Rachel too. So it's exciting, right? To know that this information is getting out there. But the reason I wanted to, on this podcast, I wanted to do a Meat for Mental Health series is because I keep seeing plant-based is pushed everywhere. I was in a pharmacy recently, and I happened to go by the magazines, and there must have been at least 4 magazines or so that were plant-based, not just an article, like the whole magazine was about plant-based. And I feel like people don't realize how much their health, their mental health is attached to the food that they're eating, and how much better they could feel if they just knew that meat is actually healing to the body.
Yeah. I think it's borderline criminal to really be pushing this sort of thing. I don't know why there's this big, massive agenda. Obviously, partly to do with money. There are massive food corporations that put out the majority of nutritional research, such as Coca. So, you have those, like, what is it? Those 7 companies that own everything. Yeah. And Coca-Cola is one of them. Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, PepsiCo, Nestle, and a few others. Yeah. Just Coca-Cola spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research than the NIH. So, and that's just Coca-Cola. So like all the other ones are dumping out similar amounts of money into nutritional research. And the one thing you can know for sure about industry funded research is that it's going to favor the industry that's paying for it. That's it.
I mean, that's just,
Yeah. And so, so the majority of these studies that are coming out there are, just swamping the literature are industry funded studies. And so either they're going to manipulate the data, manipulate the study in such a way that it brings forth a favorable outcome for their product,
Right.
or at least say something safe when in fact we damn well know that it's not.
Right.
And or if it does show a negative outcome, they just don't publish it. They don't have to.
Right.
It's a privately funded study, so they don't have to publish it. And so that's what happens. So we get this very, very skewed data set, and so you have to be able to dig through that. And so, I mean, there are a lot of very well-meaning people that just look at that and go, wow, look, the vast majority of these things are saying this is the way to go. Well, that's fine if you sort of just look at it as a surface level, but you need to dig a lot further than that. And then there's certainly people out there and certain vested interests that are pushing this for their own agenda, either for the purpose of selling more product or for something else that I don't know. But
right.
There's something going on. There's something strange going on, and it's not helping people. Mental health disorders are increasing decade after decade, just as well as all these other metabolic health issues, obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune disorders. All these things are increasing decade after decade after decade. Autism, they said in the 90s, wow, autism is going up. Well, we probably just weren't noticing it. You would notice it, but they're saying they didn't. Okay, fine. Well, in the 90s, they were paying attention, and yet autism rates have gone up every decade since then. Okay, so we have been paying attention. These aren't just, we're just picking things up because we're paying attention now. We've been paying attention for 30 years. We've been actually paying attention a lot longer than that. But if you want to say that we weren't paying attention before that, we at least were paying attention since the 90s, and things have gone up every single decade. Why is that? What's going on? And then, I mean, just with autism, there are plenty of studies that show there's a very strong nutritional relationship. Mothers who have eat more saturated fat, have higher LDL cholesterol during pregnancy, have lower rates of children with autism. Women that eat more red meat pre-conception, in the 3 months before they get pregnant, have much lower rates of kids with autism. Women who breastfeed their child instead of bottle feed, much lower rates of kids with autism. And in fact, I was thinking about this and I was like, okay, is there something to do with the food? Is there something to do with not getting enough meat? Maybe there's, sugars causing a problem, which is why I looked into that bottle fed versus breastfed, because when you're bottle feeding, and this didn't distinguish between, pumping breast milk and giving it in a bottle or using formula, but the vast majority of people who use a bottle use formula. And that formula has replaced very healthy fats with sugar. Right. And fructose. And that's not going to be good for a growing brain. And so I thought, well, maybe, there's something to do with, not getting enough meat, not getting enough these essential nutrients that come from meat. And if that were the case, then we should see a higher rate of autism in parents who are vegetarian and vegan. And in fact, that's exactly what we see. There are much higher rates of children in autism. In fact, the University of Texas at A&M found that there was actually a very like a causative relationship between being vegan and vegetarian in the genetically susceptible from a lack of carnitine. So carnitine is considered a non-essential amino acid. However, it's only situationally non-essential because you actually do better with higher levels of it. Yeah. And in fact, only 70% of people make an adequate amount of carnitine or even any carnitine at all. And so this is something that is very important to mitochondrial health and to neuronal development. You cannot develop your brain cells properly, your neurons, without carnitine and without enough carnitine. Right. And so this is something we didn't really see in the population, because normally if you could afford it, people ate meat and they fed their kids meat. And so you didn't see very high rates of this form of autism, this cause of autism, because people were eating meat, and carnitine exists in basically any animal product. Yeah. But there's a lot of it in red meat. Yeah. And so what's the first thing the vegetarians do? They cut out red meat because that's the worst, right? Well, no, actually it's the best. And so if their kid doesn't make any carnitine at all, and they're avoiding red meat, maybe they're having some fish or some eggs, but they're not getting the good stuff. They could have a deficiency and develop this type of autism. And then vegans obviously are going against any animal product at all. And so even if they are slightly deficient in making carnitine, they're going to be in big trouble as well. So this is something that is so important, especially to developing kids. And we are just hurting ourselves, and we're hurting people by pushing this plant-based agenda.
I know. I know. And I try not to get too upset by it and just do what
Mhm.
I can do to keep trucking along. And often when people come to me, they think that I'm going to tell them to eat more plants because that's what everyone tells them. Like they've
Yeah.
already done that. Most of the time, they've already tried that. And they have IBS and SIBO and all of these gut health problems and anxiety out the wahoo. And so when I tell them, back off the plants, and I really want you to eat the meats that feel the best to you, because sometimes we have to start, like if somebody comes and they've been a vegetarian for 30 years,
Mhm.
they don't go straight to the red meat usually. But I also am a big fan of taurine, which is non-essential amino acid, but I think it's super helpful for overwhelm feeling that everybody seems to have. Taurine is great. It's
Okay.
only found in animal foods. So these
Yeah.
things, there are these nutrients that if you're not eating any animals, you're really missing, especially people who feel anxious and overwhelmed. And you've touched on some of the anti-nutrients that are in the plants that are blocking the
Mhm.
absorption, because a lot of people have absorption issues. And
Mhm.
so even if they're eating a healthy diet, I just did air quotes for the people who are listening. So they're eating what they think is a healthy diet, but they're not even able to absorb the nutrients. And people
Yeah.
think that kale is better for you than a steak. I'm like, absolutely not from a nutritional standpoint, from an actual
Yeah.
nutrient standpoint that your body can utilize. That's not, so they're eating more kale, trying to fix themselves, and that's causing the problem or contributing to the problem.
Oh, I definitely think so. There are a number of ways that plants defend themselves and stop animals from eating them, and one of them is to just make their nutrients not available. So this is the idea of bioavailability. You eat a steak, nearly 100% of that is bioavailable. You will liquefy and absorb 98% of that. Very little will go out. You'll have very little residue, and and that's good because you're absorbing a lot of this because you're designed to eat it and absorb it. Whereas the plants, we don't have that capability. And so we only can absorb a very, very small percentage of the plant. I mean, most of it's fiber anyway. We can't break down fiber. We can't absorb that. We can't
No,
get any nutrition from it. It's not like a cow that can break that down and break it. It
in
actually breaks it down
stomachs,
into, yeah,
right?
exactly. And breaks it down into short chain fatty acids. And so the bacteria actually, no vertebrate animal can digest or break down fiber, but they cultivate this bacteria that eat the fiber, and as a waste product they produce short chain fatty acids, and then the bacteria die off and they absorb that as protein. So they get 70 to 80% of their calories from saturated fat and the rest from protein and very little from carbohydrates. So we don't have that ability. So this has to just come out. And so we don't absorb much of that. That's one of the nutrients that are not bioavailable to us, is long strings of glucose that have no ability to get in our body. And there are so many others as well. So there's so many other vitamins and minerals that are in there, and you can say, wow, look at all this calcium in
Yes,
spinach, look at all this iron. Oh, that's great. But the actual studies, when you give people more spinach to try to increase their calcium goes down. Why
right,
is that? Well,
right.
because calcium is not bioavailable. It's bound up to oxalates, and there are a bunch of other oxalates
Yeah,
that will get into your body and actually strip the calcium out of your own serum.
yeah,
And then you have to sap the calcium out of your bones, and you become, mineral deficient in your bones because you're trying to maintain your serum calcium, or else you die. And that's not a good thing to do.
right.
So your body has to adapt for that. So there are so many different reasons why it's not a good idea. And one of those is that bioavailability. And there are
Yeah,
a number of different ways. These you mentioned it before, the digestive disruptors, things like protease inhibitors that are in wheat and soy that block protease, which is an enzyme from our pancreas that breaks down any protein. And so if we are even eating 100% bioavailable protein from animal source nutrition, this
mhm,
blocks protease. And so we can't even break it down. We can't get it into its constituent amino acids, and we can't absorb it. And so it gets wasted. It goes out in our stools and gets eaten by our bacteria in our colon. So, it doesn't help us. So yeah, there's a number of different reasons why we should not eat plants.
right. Yeah, so many things just popped in my head. Like all the people that are doing their spinach smoothies with their
Oh yeah.
almond milk, like so full of oxalates. I'm like, back off, people. I'm not a
Hmm.
smoothie fan anyway, but I was a big juicer for a long time. I had a commercial sized juicer in my kitchen. Thought it
Oh
was the
wow.
best thing ever. I know. We learn,
Yeah.
we move on,
Yeah.
yeah, we all have a journey. Then when at some point after that, I was carnivore for 2.5 years. And then I started learning more and more about mitochondria. And I
Mhm.
started really thinking about, are my mitochondria confused? Because I'm not in winter. That's my backyard right there with the sun in Florida. And so I just started incorporating just some seasonal, not much fruit. Fruit doesn't work so great for me, but a little bit of fruit and vegetables. And because I wasn't sure if my mitochondria really needed it or not. So set me straight. We don't need vegetables. We do not need
Mhm.
fruit. So I'm told, but what do you think about the mitochondria needing some seasonal variation?
No, I don't think so. I don't think there's any evidence for that anyway. And if you think about this from historical things like that, or from our deep history,
Right.
prehistoric state,
Mm-hmm.
humans and well, early humans, Homo habilis, first sort of called true human, evolved at the beginnings of the first ice ages.
Right.
And so this is when these ice sheets were coming down. There really wasn't anything to grow, even seasonally, especially in the northern reaches, northern
Yeah. No.
or deep
Mm-hmm.
south or anything like that. So, I mean, what plants were available? We really weren't eating any plants, maybe something, but the vast majority of what we were eating was mammoth and other megafauna, and there weren't any plants available anyway. What seasonal fruits and vegetables were available to people crossing the land bridge from Asia into North America, right?
Mm-hmm.
None.
Yeah.
And what plants are available up on the ice flows in the Arctic near the North Pole,
Yeah.
where the Inuit are, or a lot of them are? None. And so some people, oh well, sometimes there's lingonberry. Yeah, okay, fine, we had some damn lingonberries. That doesn't mean they ate them, and that
Right.
doesn't mean that they even had access to them, because those would have been further south. And in fact, if you look at the historical records of the European settlers in New England and in Canada, like meeting the Native Americans in sort of northern America and southern Canada,
Mm-hmm.
they marveled at how they, and all the Native Americans across the country, they just marveled at just how they just ate meat predominantly. And I remember reading one passage. This was back in high school, but it was interesting. It always stuck with me that this guy was looking at this and said, yeah, these, as you go up further north, I get it. It's winter all the time, and certainly 9 months out of the year it's just covered in snow. This is back during the mini ice age. It was very, very cold,
Mm-hmm.
and winter was just all year long, basically. And they said, yes, we get it. You can't grow anything when it's like 9 months of snow. But for 3 months during the thaw in the south, where it does thaw, they said surely they could live off the bounty of the land, but they don't. They still choose to only eat meat,
Mm-hmm.
and that was very interesting to this person. He was very confused by it. But he also said, as you go up north, there's not even an option. So there was no thaw, especially back then, because it was colder
Right.
than a lot colder than it is now, and
Right.
so a lot less of the earth was habitable, and certainly less arable land anyway. And so
Right.
that was something that we noticed. And there was a study looking at the Plains Indians in 1800s that were just eating buffalo, and they would eat buffalo all year long,
Mm-hmm.
and they found that they were the tallest human population on Earth at all. I mean, these guys were pushing 7 feet tall. They were monsters. And so that's how we're supposed to be. That's how, and that's what you see, like in the Maasai are much taller as well. And you look at, I mean, they're eating largely animal based. And you look back at the mammoth hunters, these megafauna hunters, before we were hunter gatherers, when we were just hunters. They were, again, massive people, anywhere from 5'10", yeah, to 6'2", and in some areas they were on average 6'4" adult male height. Right now, the average adult male height in America is 5'8".
Yeah.
Right, big
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just recently was looking at some more information about that. Yeah. Then why is it that all of our doctors tell us I mean, my doctor tells me I need fiber all the time, and I just say, huh,
Mhm.
okay. because she doesn't know.
Yeah.
So I just move on. Like, she also doesn't realize that you need the sun. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, because
So,
we're troglodytes. That's why we're just
oh,
eating roots from underneath. That's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
no. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just ignore it. But when I went with my mom, who's 78, and we went to and she was a sweet doctor, very patient with her, very kind, but then started telling her that she needed to eat more fiber and telling her what kind of foods and to stay away from red meat. And I almost lost my mind in this doctor appointment. I almost had to leave because I was physically getting hot, because I
Yeah.
thought, you can tell me that because I'm going to go do my own research. I talk to people. This is what I do. My mom doesn't know. I mean, she's going to listen to me, thankfully, but
Good.
this is what's being told to people. And the more I
Mm-hmm.
did push back that. I was like, I absolutely, respectfully, I have to disagree with you. This is what I do for a living. And that is, but she says this is what she does for a living. And right. And she follows some of the worst, I get the people that I think are pushing the agenda for money more than anyone. And I just, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's really unfortunate. And yeah, you're right. I mean, this is what's being pushed out. The problem is too, is that a lot of people push this out because they just sort of heard it, and now they have, an MD after their name, so they're now an authority. But they didn't actually learn this in school. They weren't actually taught that, and they didn't actually get shown any interventional trials or anything like that, or any epidemiological studies or anything like that showed very good supportive evidence for why we should do certain things. It's just that now we're a doctor, and that's what you're supposed to do. So yes, that's what you're supposed to do. I remember that transition when I was in medical school, when people went from like, oh yeah, this is what I've heard, to like, oh yeah, no, that's what that is. You don't know that. I mean, it's just that was your presupposition going into it, but now you're an expert.
Yeah.
And so that's solidified in their head of, well, I'm an expert and this is what I do. What I always do is I don't, get angry at them or just be like, you're full of, whatever.
Yeah.
I just ask them, it's like, oh yeah, we need fiber. I was like, oh, do we? Why is that?
Right.
And I just ask them, and they're like, well, I mean, you have to for your bell. It's like, do you? I mean, 70% of animals are carnivores. They don't eat fiber. And why is that? Why are we different?
Right.
And then, we weren't eating fiber during the ice ages. How is that working? I haven't eaten fiber in 6 years.
Right.
What's going on there? Oh, well, bowel cancer. Really? What study shows that? And, and they're just like, well, actually, there's all these studies that show the opposite. And they're the only interventional trial that they've really done. It was like with, I don't know, 60 some people, like 62 people. They're all symptomatic for IBS. Yeah. And they were all eating sort of a standard diet, whatever. And what they did, the intervention is they put them into 4 categories: either eat the same amount of fiber that you are now, increase the fiber that you're eating, reduce the amount of fiber you're eating, or eliminate the fiber you're eating. And wouldn't you know, it broke out into the exact tiers that go completely opposite to what they're saying. So the people who ate the same stayed the same. The people who ate more fiber got worse. People who ate slightly less, some less fiber, they got better. People who eliminated fiber, they all resolved. They all resolved their IBS symptoms completely, just by not even removing all plants and things like that, but just removing the fiber. So the fiber's not great. And there was a study looking at diverticulosis and risk factors for that. And there was they did over 2,000 colonoscopies. So looking up at the distal colon, seeing, looking for diverticulosis, and which is outpouchings of the distal colon. I think this is sort of like a failure of that. You have diverticuli that can form on your bladder from getting this stretch response from not peeing when you need to. And that can build up as well. And so I think that in the same way with your colon, is just sort of, you've just worn this thing out. And the only risk factors they found, well, first of all, age. Everyone knows that. The older you get, the more likely you are to get diverticulosis. But past that, it was increased fiber and increased number of bowel motions a week. So more than 15 bowel motions a week correlated strongly with developing diverticulosis, and eating a lot more. And the more fiber people ate, the stronger their likelihood of getting diverticulosis. Meat did not make it. Constipation did not make it. and fat certainly did not make it either. So, people say, oh, well, this is from being constipated. And obviously to fix constipation, you need to eat more fiber. Well, first of all, that's not true either, because there was another study looking at that. And they found that actually when you reduce fiber or eliminated fiber, people actually went more regularly and had better bowel motions and softer, on the Bristol stool chart, they were not constipated. And so all of that is out. This is all been thoroughly discredited.
Right.
And all you have to do is look at people's health, right? You have people, like they get better, especially people with bowel issues, people with IBD, IBS, they get a lot better. And there's studies showing that if you eliminate carbohydrates and fiber, so you put someone on a no fiber ketogenic diet, that has been shown in studies to put people with Crohn's disease into remission, keep them into remission as much as 51 months. So over 4 years without medication.
Right.
Contrast that with the group that kept fiber and carbs in 0 months, right? Big difference.
Right.
So fiber is not good for you. And that is what all the objective evidence shows.
Right. And that's what I see clinically. That Crohn's, all of it. And so when people at least reduce the fiber, even if they're not completely cutting out carbohydrates completely, they're reducing the fiber and they improve. And when they go completely off of carbohydrates altogether, of course, that's where we see the biggest benefit. So it really kind of drives me crazy, this whole fiber thing. But I do try to keep an open mind because, people will say, but our microbiome needs it. And so I have been studying the microbiome since 2009, and I see where they see that information that is put out by some if I was just looking, if I was a person that didn't study it deeply and was just looking around, I can see where you would come up with that conclusion. But you have to dig and you have to ask more questions and you have to say, well, wait a minute, if the diversity of the microbiome is similar in the Inuit and in African tribes, but they don't eat the same stuff, but they're both hunters, like they are not eating carbohydrates because they are not available. And even when they are, that's not what they prefer. Like, why would their diversity be similar? If it were the plants, like it's not the plants. But I also am a big fan of fish because of the DHA. So I just feel like DHA is so important in the body. I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, no, 100%. No, DHA is fantastic for you. So your brain is, the solid components of your brain makes up about 70% of that is fat, and 20% of that is DHA. So yes, DHA is great. And the good thing is, grass-fed and finished beef actually does have contain, DHA, EPA. When you start feeding it more grains, that can reduce down. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, no, fish is great for that. And that's why, traditionally call fish brain food. There's a lot of, structural components that we use to make up our brain, because we're not really great at making DHA.
No,
DHA and EPA don't exist in plants.
No, they do not. Right. Let's just make that real clear to people. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So you have to get this from animal source nutrition, because we make a bit of it, but we don't make enough, and we don't make as much as we really need. I've heard some people contend that ALA will convert into DHA,
but not well.
But no. So two things. One, there are conflicting studies that say if it does it at all. And the ones that say that, oh yeah, it can do that. I mean, you're talking, very, very, very small amounts. You're not going to get enough of this stuff. Just because it can do something doesn't mean that it does it to the extent that you need it to. And it also doesn't mean that it's not coming with a price tag, right? Because yes, plants do have nutrients in them. Some of them are locked up. You can't use them, but they also come with defense chemicals that are trying to stop you from benefiting from eating them. That's it. And so let's say it has some nutrient that's really good for you. Well, that's great. What else does it have? There's 200,000 chemicals in there. What do those ones do? Right? You want that one. You want some mineral or something else. In mushrooms, I remember Dr. Joel Furman said, oh, you really want mushrooms because it has anti-VEGF in it. And anti-VEGF is really good at fighting cancer. And it's like, okay, great. Do you have cancer? then why are you taking chemo? We literally use anti-VEGF in chemotherapy regimes for certain cancers, right? So why the hell are you taking this if you don't have the cancer that can help treat? And also, what else is in there? Let's say you do have cancer and anti-VEGF is a great idea. What else is in there? Well, there are over 100 known human carcinogens to start. And there's a study out of UC Berkeley in 1989 from Professor Bruce Ames that showed that the mushrooms were 500 times more likely to cause cancer in the lab than pesticides that were being used at the time. One was called ALAR.
Right.
And so they were trying to ban ALAR and say, oh, we got to get rid of this. This stuff is poison. And like, well, that's exactly the point of a pesticide, is to be poison.
Right.
So you poison things trying to eat your crop. That's the entire purpose of these things. Yeah. But the plants do this themselves already. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so they actually are far more toxic than the pesticides we're spraying on them. And that we've known that for decades.
Yeah, because a lot of people in the carnivore world will say they eat mushrooms because it's fungi. I quit mushrooms probably before I even went carnivore. I just didn't, they just kept making me not feel good. But a lot of people like the mushrooms, big into the mushrooms. Like, oh, okay. I try not to be dogmatic, but I'm also like, what is that doing for you? And what else is in that?
Well, yeah. Well, 100%. And the thing is that, when I talk about, plants, having defense chemicals, like fungus is in there as well, and even algae. There's a lot of algae that are quite toxic as well. Right. And those can actually, and those can be eaten by, animals. And then is, like red tide and different sorts of things, the algae get into, filter fish, and or just the fish population in general, and then you sort of eat them, and you can get this toxic algae exposure, and you can die. It's very serious, right? But mushrooms in particular are super toxic, right? So there's like 600,000 different fungi, right? And there's about 10,000 different types of mushrooms, right? Think about this: how many of those mushrooms don't kill you on the spot or give you a religious experience, right? There's not many. They have these very, very extreme reactions. A lot of fungus, fungus in general, but mushrooms in particular are extraordinarily toxic. And then, you really have to know which ones are safe to eat. Yeah, exactly. And there's some of these things that look very, very similar. And so, you pick this one, and if you get it just wrong, you could be dead. Yeah. And so, first of all, why would you? I mean, yes, you grow these things, which ones are growing, but, just because they don't give you that acute phase response, they don't kill you or make you hallucinate, we are assuming that these things are not only safe, but good for us, which I think is a pretty bold move to take with your health. And I don't think it's borne out, because in fact, they do have a lot of defense chemicals that are quite robust. And again, in the lab, shown to be 500 times more toxic or 500 times more likely to cause cancer than pesticides, right? And everyone's all over pesticides. Oh my God, these are so horrible, horrible, horrible. That's what's wrong with things, is the pesticides. If you grow it in your own garden, then the hemlock is good for you somehow. No, the hemlock's bad for you, and so is the spinach, and certainly the mushrooms are as well, to varying degrees. Some are more benign than others. I mean, iceberg lettuce, there's not even much in iceberg lettuce, good or bad. So, but, and the thing is that, okay, well, maybe mushrooms will kill you. Maybe the vast majority of plants and fungus are inedible. They will kill you or make you extraordinarily sick. This is why if you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant, right? Most of them will take you out. And so of the available edible plants, that doesn't mean that they're completely safe and healthy. Now, people say, well, I ate a salad and I eat salads all the time, and, I'm not dead, so therefore it's not poisonous. Okay, well, people also smoke 3 packs of cigarettes a day and a bottle of whiskey every day. And they do this for years. They do this for decades. Is anyone arguing that cigarettes and alcohol are not toxic? So, well, you can't say that spinach is the same as tobacco. Never did. I never said they were the same thing. What I'm saying is that you can do something that we know is very harmful, like smoking, like drinking, and it doesn't kill you right away. It takes decades and decades and decades, but this causes slow but sure harm and degradation to your body and your health. Mm-hmm. And you will eventually get to the point where you are extremely sick and unwell, and you will die young, and you will die after decades of pain and discomfort. And that's not a very good thing for anybody to do. And the same principle applies to other defense chemicals that are in plants, like spinach, like lettuce, like cabbage and rutabaga and all these different sorts of things, right? They have these defense chemicals, and the more you eat, the more they'll build up, the more harm they will cause. And after years, after decades, this will build up, and they manifest in ways that we name. We call it Crohn's disease. We call it diabetes. We call it, Alzheimer's, dementia. So I think that those diseases aren't diseases at all. I think these are a manifestation of these plant toxicities. Oh, they don't poison you, blah, blah, blah. No, you just don't recognize that diabetes is exactly is a toxicity from these plants, right? But we have studies showing in humans and in mice that if you remove carbohydrates, you put someone on a ketogenic diet, you can reverse type 2 diabetes. And actually in mice, you can actually regrow the beta islet cells, which is kind of crazy. You can actually start making insulin again, right? They haven't proven that in humans, but they've done that in mice. So, and there are a number of other studies like in Crohn's disease, you get rid of carbohydrates and fiber, you put them into remission. Putting someone on an elemental diet, someone with Crohn's on an elemental diet, which is just a very highly processed, it's just the macros and micros that you need in powdered form. That putting someone on that diet is a better treatment for an acute flare-up of Crohn's disease where you're having bloody diarrhea 30 times a day. It's a better treatment for that than prednisone, right? So just not eating the wrong thing is a better treatment than steroids.
Right. Well,
okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what does that mean? That means that something you're eating is causing Crohn's. Plain and simple. It's plain as day. You eat this, you get Crohn's. You stop eating it, you don't have Crohn's. What else is there to understand here? You drink water from a leaded pipe, you get lead poisoning. But that manifests in specific ways, causing end organ damage and neurological deficits, right? But we didn't know that at the time. It took the Romans to trip over their own plumbing system to understand that, oh crap, lead's a bad idea. You don't want to get that in your water supply. You don't want to use that as in glasses and things like that. So, that was a thing. They were getting low-grade lead poisoning and people were having all these different problems. They just thought, okay, people are sick. There's a plague. There's a something. What's going on? And then they figured out, no, actually we're being poisoned, right? Well, we're in our lead pipes now. We're eating a whole bunch of things that we have no business eating, and we're getting toxicity, low grade in a lot of cases. But we are getting a toxic exposure, and so we're getting sick, and we're thinking, oh, well, look at this disease. Oh, look at this. These diseases are popping up all over the place, and they're increasing in prevalence decade after decade. And we need to recognize that these are not diseases, that this is a toxic exposure, some sort of exposure that is harming us and builds up over the years. And in the genetically susceptible, they're manifesting as these diseases like autoimmune issues and so on. And as the sooner we realize that, the sooner we can get people healthy, get them off this stuff, get them away from the exposure, and people just go back to being healthy, which is the natural state of humanity. It's the natural state of all animals in nature, is to be healthy. How are we the only sick, fat, squishy animals in nature? How did we become the most dominant species to ever exist on this planet if we were just so weak and miserable? How do you get through an ice age hunting mammoths with rocks and spears if you are not a dominant force of nature? It doesn't happen like that. You do not eke through, you do not eke out an existence during an ice age. You either thrive or you go extinct. And we not only thrived, we dominated every other animal species on this planet throughout the ice ages and beyond. So obviously our natural state of being is one of health and physical and mental acuity that is just not manifest these days. People are sick and they shouldn't be. And I think it's 100% due to the food that we're eating.
Yeah, I feel like I was just at a sermon. I'm like, preach, Dr. Chaffee, preach. Because it's true. I see that. I've been seeing that for a long time. So the more people can get that. And I just want to point out, it also ages you, people. So if none of that sounded great, if you don't care about that, you can literally reverse age your cells. So that's might be a bigger plus for somebody that is listening.
Yeah. I mean, I aged, like, I took like 10 years off my face, and, I was 38 when I got back on. I mean, I started this like 23 years ago, but I only did it for 5 years and then slipped off it because I didn't realize how significant what, just eating meat was and what that meant biologically. So I started this back up again. Ooh, I guess 6 years now. I guess it's been like 6 years now, and going on 6 years. Anyway, it's been a while, 5.5, 6 years.
Yeah.
And, so I was 38 at the time. And, I came back on this. I just stopped eating. I was already doing, I guess, keto. Not that I was, doing keto. I just wasn't eating carbs and sugar and things like that. And I wasn't drinking alcohol, just eating veggies and meat and lean meat, not much meat. And then I really came across information. I was like, no, humans actually are carnivores. It's just a kind of animal that we are. And all animals have a species specific diet that they need to follow for optimal health. So I was like, right, get rid of these stupid plants, just ditch them out of there, and start eating more meat. And I come across all the studies showing that actually saturated fat was really good for us, cholesterol was really good for us, they weren't bad for us, red meat's excellent for us. And so I said, okay, I'm going to start eating a lot more fatty meat, start getting this in my diet. I just got rid of all the plants, and I really increased the amount of meat that I was eating. It probably quintupled the amount of calories I was taking in. And I lost 23 pounds in 10 days. And then after that, I stayed the exact same weight. I didn't lose an ounce after that. But I was shredding fat and stacking on muscle. My body habitus just completely transformed. And so I became much more muscular and much more lean. And it took, months, but I got down to a very lean body fat percentage. At the time I was working out and lifting weights and playing, and I went back to play rugby at 38. I went to play professional rugby because I just felt so damn good. I felt better at 38 than I did at 28 playing, in the Super League and, being a contender for the World Cup. And, I was just feeling amazing. And I was eating way more calories, but I was eating the right thing. And my body was working properly. And so I got down to I was very lean. I was probably like 6% body fat and very muscular. And I was 38 years old. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to, get much more muscular, much more athletic, and effortlessly get into a very lean physique like that.
That's
at that age.
Yeah, because I'm 52, so I didn't.
You do not look it at all.
I started in my late 40s, figured this stuff out. I was already paleo. I didn't really understand keto till later. But we get where we get. But I was paleo, so I was mostly eating meat and vegetables too. And then when I just finally dropped all the vegetables and just went straight meat, I think people can't understand how I did not realize that I didn't feel very good. I thought I was healthy. I thought I felt pretty good. And then you start to feel amazing. You're like, oh, okay. So that's why we tell everybody. It's like, no, you could feel amazing. Not just like a little better, or making it through and sludging through. Literally, you wake up with being energized for the day. So it really is impressive. And I think sometimes when people do it for some other reason, so they cut out their carbohydrates at least, and then they're increasing their fat, they're focusing on the good fat and protein. They maybe aren't completely on a ketogenic diet, but they're just lower carb. And I think people are surprised that it actually helps their mental health. I don't think a lot of people don't think they have mental health issues, especially if you've been an anxious person your whole life. You don't know what it feels like to be less anxious until all of a sudden you are like, oh my gosh, I could have been feeling like this the whole time. So, yeah.
Well, I had that exact same thought probably about 2 weeks into doing this again. And I just felt unbelievable. I felt better than I had since I was in my early 20s doing a carnivore diet. And that for that first 5 years in my early 20s when I was just doing carnivore, I've never felt better in my life. I've never been more athletic. I've never had better endurance and stamina and fitness ever. And then all of a sudden at 38, I feel exactly like I did at 22 on a carnivore diet. I felt like an absolute superhero. And I remember thinking to myself sort of 2 weeks into this and how great I felt. I looked back on my life and realized just how awful I've felt my entire life, except for those 5 years. And I was really pissed. I was like, this is bullshit. I should have felt like this my whole life. I should have developed like this. My mom should have been doing this and breastfeeding me and in utero and then early life, just eating meat, not being literally forced to eat vegetables. I was that kid. You had to like hold me down and force me
my
to
older son wouldn't, like, he would scream and run if you put a vegetable on his plate. Like,
survival.
would not do it.
Yeah.
Like, and he's pretty amazing now. I mean, he was so hard to feed as a kid. I mean, it was just so hard to feed the kid. But
well, it was hard to feed him poison.
Well, no, but I mean, he wouldn't eat a steak. I mean, he was.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh my God. You can't come at him with a piece of
You
chicken
need
and start gagging. You're like, So anyway, not to get off on Rye, but Rye's over in England eating steaks right now, having a great time.
Perfect.
Yeah.
There you go.
It's all good. It all works itself out. But I felt badly as a mom of young boys. I thought they needed veggies. I really did try. And I wish I had not even bothered. Like, the energy that I put into that. If we had just pushed, if we just had meat and that was it, wow, everybody could be feeling a whole lot better a lot sooner. But yeah, it's funny that you were pissed. Like, I could have been feeling like this.
Yeah, really. And that's the thing, I talk to some people as well, and they say, well, I would try carnivore, but I'm not sick. I don't have any problems I need to reverse. And I was like, you don't actually even know how many problems you have.
Yeah, it's true.
You don't even know how bad you feel right now. It's just, you feel good in comparison to yourself, your whole life. But, we all have these sort of baseline level of terrible that we feel. We don't even realize that we feel terrible because it's consistent with how we've been feeling for years. And so we go sort of up and down. Yeah. And so maybe, I'm not really feeling great. Oh, okay. Well, I'll clean things up, stop drinking as much, cut down on the cigarettes, or maybe stop smoking, or, cut out the processed food, start eating a bit cleaner, things like that. Okay, I feel a little bit better, things like that. That's great. And so people do that, and that works well for them, but they don't actually realize just how much better it can get. I don't feel a little better. I don't feel a lot better. I feel 1,000 times better than I've ever felt in my entire life. I literally feel like a different breed of human. And in a lot of ways I am, because my body is working in ways that most people aren't. Most people's bodies are not working that way. And thankfully, there's a growing body of people like yourself and others who are finding this way of eating and are realizing that level of health and can share this with others. But it is a vast, vast difference. And so when I talked to so many people, you know what? It was even better. So I spoke to a lady. She's Native American up in Canada, so she's from First Nation Inuit heritage, and she culturally and came from eating a lot of meat, and they would hunt and do all these sorts of things. Her daughter, and now the Native Americans did not have, especially the Native Canadians and Alaskans and things like that. They did not have agriculture, and certainly did not have exposure to agricultural products till very, very recently. And so, I mean, I learned this as a kid, that the Native Americans, when eating a Western diet, were 4 times as likely to develop heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, obesity, and all the rest. Right. And I remember thinking in my head, like, well, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. It's only when eating a Western diet. Yeah. And we eat a Western diet and we get these diseases, which used to be called Western disease, a disease of the West, by the way.
Right.
And we just get it at a lower rate. So, what were they eating that we are not? And vice versa, right? Well, it didn't say it at the time, but they were just eating meat, and they're eating fatty meat, especially. Right. And so she came from that culturally, and obviously is going to be much more sensitive to any of these defense chemicals that are in plants, because they haven't been eating them, and as we know from the historical records in North America, actually in Australia as well, I was reading different accounts of the explorers and missionaries that were living with the Australian Aboriginals, did not eat plants. Right. And people say, oh, they eat all these different plants, they make these teas out of. No, they don't. They know which ones to eat if they cannot get meat.
Right. Only.
But if they have meat, they do not eat that.
I know.
Exactly.
I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And they might use things medicinally, but you don't take medicine every day, do you? Oh, this has good antibiotic properties. Great. Come back to me when you have pneumonia, you know? And so, they did not use these things. They used them medicinally, and or as an emergency sort of survival food, right?
Yes. Source of food. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And
It's
so,
yeah.
I was just going to say, so this lady,
Yeah.
she obviously comes from that heritage where she's going to be a bit more sensitive to these things. Her daughter had huge food allergies as a kid, just couldn't eat any of these things. So, just defaulted into just eating meat. Well, they knew meat was good. Traditionally, they ate meat, so they ate a lot of meat. And so for 40 years, she's nearly 60 now. Since her daughter was very young,
Yeah.
they just switched to meat. And so they've just been eating meat since then. But she used a lot of spices and she used seasonings. But she's been carnivore for 40 years. And not even just like eating, store-bought meat and things like that. Like I like hunting elk and moose and things like that.
Right.
Right. So super healthy meat, like the best you can get, putting spices and seasonings on it. That's how she likes to cook. Great. She has 4 autoimmune diseases. Right.
Mm.
And so she found, the carnivore challenge that I do, just sort of to say, hey, it actually makes a big difference just getting rid of all the last vestiges of plant material
Yeah.
and just straight meat and water.
Yeah.
This can actually make a huge difference in your life. And so it's just sort of to help encourage people to do that and give them some support and things like that. So she's looking at that, going like, there's no way these seasonings can be doing that. It's almost nothing. There's got to be something else to it. She's like, you know what? Give it a try.
Give it a whirl. Yeah.
After 30 days, her autoimmune issues were subsiding, and now she's in remission. It was the damn spices. Like that's she's obviously much more susceptible than other people.
Right.
Most people are not going to have that experience, but that is just to show you that even a small amount, you're just using a bit of seasonings on something, that can absolutely be enough to trigger these responses and into people that are a bit more susceptible. So these things are not benign. Oh, well, in the proportion that we're eating. Yeah, in the proportion that we're eating it, it's giving us autoimmune diseases and cancer and diabetes and all these other sorts of problems. And in people that are more susceptible, even less will do the trick. So I thought that was a very, very interesting illustration. And in fact, just one more point, here in Australia, the native Australians, first of all, did not have the so-called diseases of the West when people first got here, right? Now that they're eating Western food, they have the diseases of the West, which we just call getting older, and they get it at a much, much, much higher rate. And they get them much younger than other people do as well. When I first came here, I was told by other clinicians that when you're seeing an Aboriginal patient, whatever their age is on their ID tag says, just add 20 years to that. Because they just age so much quicker, they develop these diseases so much faster. And so if you're thinking about, okay, what's more likely to be the case in this population, you need to consider them 20 years older. So if they're 40, you need to think of what's common in a 60-year-old with these symptoms. Wow. So that's from eating the wrong thing, because they're more genetically susceptible to eating the wrong things. Then they go out and they stop eating this stuff. Problem go away.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and I think it's important because nothing else has changed that much. Their lifestyle actually hasn't changed, but the things they do, they're non-drinkers. So it's not alcohol and other things haven't. It's only that they've been introduced to Western diet. So yeah.
And I mean, alcohol will make it worse too.
Alcohol will definitely make it worse, but I think people are like, oh, it could be something else. I mean, it's very clear that it's the food that is making
100%
that sick. And yeah, amazing. So I'm hoping that people are hearing this and they're going, okay, I want to give it a try. Because just give it a try. What I want them to realize is that it's not going to kill you to even just to give it a try. And if things don't improve, you can always go back to the crap you've been eating. I mean, what do you have to lose, really? But I think people are sometimes afraid that because we're told that meat's bad for us and it's going to kill us. So I think after this, people are not going to think that, and they can find you and listen to more of your interviews. It's so nice of you to constantly be letting people interview you, putting in your podcast is great, so they can find more information if they're curious.
Yeah. Well, I hope it does at least, raise people's curiosity and make them think, okay, well, maybe these things aren't necessarily 100% true. These sort of dogmatic ideas about nutrition, like cholesterol being bad and causing heart disease, red meat causing colon cancer. They don't. I mean, these things are just, that they just don't. And so, understanding that those were industry funded, research, and they were bought and paid for, that they, corrupted the scientific academies, and bribed multiple professors from Harvard and elsewhere to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies. And one of those professors was named head of the USDA. He was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, saturated fat increased cholesterol, stop eating both. And this is what vilified meat, said meat's really bad, meat causes cholesterol, causes heart disease, all these sorts of things. Complete garbage, complete nonsense. That was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016. That's not up for debate. That's not a question. That is a matter of historical record.
Right.
And so, we know this now. We know that there's all this garbage out there that has tainted the scientific literature and the academies, and people just being aware of that and going like, okay, well, that was bullshit. What else is
bullshit? Yeah.
Yeah. And just start pulling at that thread, because it's a big sweater, and it all comes off.
Yeah. And once you start, it goes pretty quickly from there. So yeah. Well, I know it's Friday evening where you are, and it's Friday morning here. So I hope, I know, I really appreciate you taking some of your Friday evening to be with me and to have this interview. I love it. I think it's super helpful for people. I'm glad we really talked a lot about mental health too. I think that's key for people. So thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me on. And I'm glad we could have this chat, and hopefully people found it helpful.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they'll find it helpful.
Good.